अगर मैं आपको सबसे बड़ा पिक्चर दिखाऊं इस समय पे शेयर्स, इंडिया टुडे द हेल्थ केयर मार्केट स्टैंड्स एट अबाउट 368 बिलियन यूएस, इफ आई एम नॉट रॉन्ग. 5 साल में इट्स एक्सपेक्टेड टू गो ओवर 880 बिलियन बिकॉज more than double.
Right.
यहाँ पे सबसे ज्यादा प्रॉब्लम होता है because the average vendor repayment cycle in the country from a hospital to a vendor is more than 4 months at this point of time for this thing.
That's way too high.
It's way high. It's way too high. At just the post-COVID scenario wherein suddenly the credit business has shot up so much that sustainability of hospitals is becoming a question. Then it took time for the results to also come in. Shreyas, I'll be very honest about that. It's not like हमने आज partnership sign किया and then I had a pipeline that was like just ready to be harvested at that point. Wasn't the case.
How do you see the new healthcare ecosystem that emerged from post-COVID era? Welcome to this exciting episode of Fintech Ki Baat with Shrey Jain from HealthCred. And this is our second segment, Untitled Ki Baat, wherein we deep dive into the evolution of healthcare finance in India and what role is HealthCred playing in it. If you haven't checked out the first segment, wherein Shrey talks about his entrepreneurship journey, the origin of HealthCred, and a lot of interesting anecdotes, please click on the link somewhere here and check it out if you haven't. We'll wait for you until you come back. So anyways, if you're back now, let's get straight to this. Hey Shrey, thank you so much for doing this. It's been super interesting so far. Your journey has been amazing. You remind me of a phenomena that I've heard from a co-podcaster do, right? It's called reverse brain drain. When people come back to India from US after completing their degrees and start something up in India, and it's really good to see that phenomena and talk to you about that as well. So I think we have covered that as well, guys. So do check it out. Having said that, let's get straight into what HealthCred does. Over to you, Shrey.
Yeah, so thanks for having me again, Chris. At HealthCred, we're basically developing working capital financing solutions for hospitals and the medical supply chain. So we basically assist hospitals in addressing their cash flow problems. The same thing for the medicine, pharmaceutical and consumable supply chain as well, wherein we try to address the working capital gap that arises as a result of credit base particularly. So before going into the detail about the product, I would just like to take a moment to maybe explain the healthcare landscape at this point of time and kind of tailwinds that are driving greater penetration and heavier credit business at this point.
Sorry, just to stop it, I'm really sorry. I had a very interesting observation that would probably amplify what you're going to just say about it. When I had reached out to you कि यार कुछ करते हैं podcast, you're doing something really interesting and unique in fintech landscape, काफी refreshing, and everyone is doing standard lending या pay with कुछ कर रहा है, insurance में कुछ कर रहा है. This was something really refreshing, right? And at that point of time, I put out a message in a community of founders that I run, as well as a few other communities that I'm a part of. I'm looking for founders to host on my podcast and talk with them about the journey and whatever I do on the podcast, right? I got around 8 to 10 responses, not a lot, but all of them were now into healthcare finance. I was really surprised कि यार ऐसा क्या हो रहा है, and how did I not notice it before this? Like, what is happening in the industry? Why is everyone suddenly so gung-ho about it?
Yeah.
And still not everyone is hearing about it. But you don't see any finfluencers or fintech influencers talk about this or post it and everything. But there is definitely something happening, something has changed. So tell us, spill the tea.
Absolutely. Yeah. So I would just like to draw like a comparison. Like you very rightly said, like a lot of people are now entering the space. In VC terms, the space is heating up, basically.
Yes.
So see, simple सी बात ये है कि 19 और 19 के बाद it's like BC and AD वाला logic है कि like pre-COVID and post-COVID. That is how healthcare also needs to be viewed, because the pre-COVID requirements of a hospital or a healthcare institution were very different and are very different from a post-COVID requirement at this point of time. This is because the landscape has changed massively. due to three key reasons. There are socio-economic and political macro tailwinds that are driving a massive change in healthcare at this point of time. And all because everyone wants to target SDG target 3.8, Sustainability Development Goals, target 3.8, which basically talks about patients' financial inclusivity in healthcare. How do we make healthcare more accessible, affordable, available, and with a decent quality, most importantly. So, healthcare impact के basically कहते हैं कि 4 A's हैं. So there is 4 A's में आता है availability, accessibility, affordability, and acceptability. So acceptability talks about quality, availability talks about infrastructure being there. Accessibility talks about कि मैं अगर tier 2, tier 3 टाउन में रह रहा हूँ तो मेरे को कितना ट्रैवल करना पड़ता है. Affordability talks about कि मैं वो healthcare afford कर सकता हूँ कि. So talking about the first one, which is availability. Availability is about setting up massive infrastructure at this point of time. So here comes the political tailwind at this point, which is the government in itself, like under PMJY, they want to set up 3,000 new 100-bedded facilities at this point of time to address the growing and the need for bed demand in tier 2 and tier 3 cities.
3,000 new 100-bedded facilities.
100-bedded facilities at least. Now, अगर आप आज के समय में देखोगे एवरेज बेड कैपेसिटी एंड बेड पेनिट्रेशन nearly 73% is in tier 1 and spokes of tier 1 or tier 2 cities at this point of time. Accessibility in tier 3 and tier 4 is very limited, which brings us to a second thing. What they want to do is that आपको less than 5 kilometers or 30 minutes से ज़्यादा travel time नहीं होना चाहिए to avail at least primary care. In that case, primary care में usually आपका OPD segment आएगा, not your admissions and surgeries and everything of that sort. But for primary care, you should not be traveling more than that time. So which should be, which is again a government mandate to improve accessibility of healthcare. Affordability is a very interesting topic. Affordability is where, how do you make healthcare affordable at this point of time? So as a rising middle class in the country, people are realizing COVID really made people understand the importance of having health insurance so as to basically counter unforeseen high out-of-pocket expenditures at this point. So, होता क्या, अगर आपके पास इंश्योरेंस नहीं है तो आपको पैसा अपने जेब से देना पड़ रहा है. इंश्योरेंस है तो you can avail insurance की facility in two ways. One is reimbursement, wherein you pay, you go to a non-network partner, you pay, and then you are able to get the money back from the hospital, from the insurer. The other is cashless, wherein you basically get discharged on the basis of an approval letter that is provided to the hospital by your insurer, and then the insurer settles that amount with the hospital, which is the credit business that I'll come to in a second. And the fourth one is in the A's is basically acceptability, which is quality, which is basically NABH accreditation. So which is again becoming a very ramped up thing. The NABH accreditation used to take a lot more time 5 to 10 years back than it does at this point of time. And there are different levels to that accreditation as well. So talking about affordability and insurance particularly, the other mandate that is there, IRDAI ka, is to go 100% cashless or universal health coverage. Sorry, cashless everywhere and universal health coverage. Universal health coverage cannot be achieved by targeting all these four things, and all these four things are something that requires financing. आपको अस्पताल लगाना है तो आपको फाइनेंसिंग चाहिए, आपको एक्सेसिबिलिटी बढ़ानी है पेशेंट के लिए तो आपको छोटे सेटअप्स लगाने पड़ेंगे इन दैट विसिनिटी व्हिच रिक्वायर्स फाइनेंसिंग अगेन. अफोर्डेबिलिटी इंप्रूव करनी है तो यू नीड टू मेक श्योर दैट जो हॉस्पिटल्स हैं जिनका जो क्रेडिट बिजनेस ग्रो हो रहा है दैट गेट्स टारगेटेड इन द राइट वे and that their working capital gets addressed, and acceptability बढ़ानी है because anyway accreditation is also an expensive process to get that thing done. So yeah, which is why you see the space heating up a lot, and financing in health and all the different domains of health becoming very big right now.
Interesting. No, I think this is really exciting. Given that you have given this entire background, I think I knew that the government mandate was coming in, but the impact that kind of cascaded down into the industry, the way it's happening, the number of clinics and the number of hospitals that needs to be opened at a certain interval and all of that, and the kind of working capital demand that it will generate, I think it is unprecedented. At least from my perspective, I had not expected कि इतना large scale impact होगा जितना दिख रहा है.
Yeah. नहीं, दिस इज द केस एज वेल यहाँ पे. सो जैसे अगर हम सिर्फ अफोर्डेबिलिटी की ही बात करें, देयर इज अ मैंडेट कि आज से फॉर एग्जांपल आई कम फ्रॉम like my family comes from a village close to this town called Pali in Rajasthan, which is close to Jodhpur. कुछ भी हमारे दादा दादी को उस समय पे ट्रीटमेंट कराना होता तो सीधा हमें जोधपुर जाना पड़ता था. पहले पाली में हॉस्पिटल है, बिकॉज पाली के हॉस्पिटल में मेरे डैड का इंश्योरेंस कवर नहीं चलता था. अच्छा. So we used to go to Jodhpur, which is another hour and a half ahead in that. Right. Now insurance penetration पे भी mandates हैं. You have to go to tier 2 and tier 3 cities and empanel hospitals in those regions. Insurance empanelment also requires like certain criteria. I cannot just put 15 beds in my house and say that I've declared it a hospital at this point of time. Right. I want HDFC Ergo to start send like HDFC Ergo patients can now come and do surgery over here. So there is a proper process to that as well. So that penetration is also what is driving that increase in working capital gap as well.
Indeed. No, pretty interesting stuff. I think what I also want to understand, from your end is, do you have any idea of the quantum of capital requirement that is being generated because of this entire situation that has risen up?
So, अगर मैं आपको सबसे बड़ा पिक्चर दिखाऊं इस समय पे शेयर्स, इंडिया टुडे द हेल्थ केयर मार्केट स्टैंड्स एट अबाउट 368 बिलियन US, if I'm not wrong. 5 साल में it's expected to go over 880 billion because more than double. So healthcare costs are growing at a 15% का compounded annual growth rate, which basically means कि लगभग 6 साल में आपका हेल्थ केयर का कॉस्ट, अगर आज मैं हर्निया का ऑपरेशन 40 से करा रहा हूँ, 6 साल के बाद वही हर्निया का ऑपरेशन 70 से 80,000 में होगा. So as the cost of healthcare grows up, the need for coverage increases, but the cost of premium also goes up simultaneously.
True. Makes sense.
So the quantum is massive. इसमें भी मतलब like the segments are different. मतलब 368 में one portion would be for IPD, some portion would be for pharmacy. Pharmacy takes a big chunk out of that market as well. And then उसमें भी IPD is usually tertiary. Then there will be primary care, there will be OPD services, secondary care services in health, and like there are multiple segments that would be there in that $368 billion.
Understood. No, I think this is really helpful, and I think this also helps set context for our audiences as well कि क्या हो रहा है पूरे इंडस्ट्री में. Having said that, what exactly is the gap that you guys are solving for? How do you fit into the bigger picture?
Right. So when we talk about affordability, the first thing that comes to our head is insurance. कि insurance होगा तो healthcare becomes affordable. Because I am honoring my premium payment every year. तो मेरा जब कोई इंसिडेंट होगा तो आई कैन शो माय इंश्योरेंस कार्ड, एंड गिवन द फैक्ट दैट कैशलेस एवरीवेयर होना चाहिए एंड एवरीथिंग, आई वुड वांट टू गो टू अ नेटवर्क पार्टनर जहाँ पे मैं कैशलेस फैसिलिटी दे सकूं ताकि मेरे को अपने जेब से पैसा ना देना पड़े. राइट नाउ अब प्रॉब्लम यहाँ पे स्टार्ट होता है बिकॉज इंश्योरेंस कंपनीज, मैं एज अ पेशेंट गया, मैंने अपना ट्रीटमेंट करा दिया, आई गेट डिस्चार्ज आफ्टर द अप्रूवल लेटर कम्स फ्रॉम द इंश्योरर, एंड देन दैट इज वेयर द क्रेडिट डेज स्टार्ट फॉर द हॉस्पिटल. Now, the credit days can vary depending upon the type of the insurer. I won't go into the details कौन कितना समय लेता है, but like 3 type के insurers हैं आपके भारत में. You've got your private insurers, you've got your PSU insurers, and you've got the government schemes which could be state sponsored or center sponsored, and अलग-अलग होते हैं, like army, retired army people के जैसे CHS होता है. There are multiple such corporates, I won't call them corporate, but like multiple such schemes that are offered to via the central government as well. In that case, so central government employees के लिए CGHS हो जाता है, say for example. And then हर state का अपना अलग अलग होता है. जैसे आप महाराष्ट्र में तो वहाँ पे महात्मा ज्योतिबा फुले स्कीम चलता है, and राजस्थान में RGHS, राजस्थान गवर्नमेंट हेल्थ केयर स्कीम चलता है, so on and so forth. So ये अलग अलग टाइप के जो इंश्योरेंस स्कीम्स हैं, तो क्रेडिट में like in case of cashless health insurance, the repayment tenure or from the insurer to the hospital can vary anywhere between 30 to 120 or plus 120 plus days.
Right.
Now post-COVID, and again this was part of the research of 86 hospitals that we did initially at that point of time. One thing that we wanted to see है कि अच्छा ऐसा है कि मतलब हमें दिख तो रहा है कि इंश्योरेंस का पेनिट्रेशन सडनली इतना बूम अप कर रहा है, मतलब लोग कैशलेस भी ज्यादा ले रहे होंगे. अब कैशलेस ज्यादा ले रहे हैं तो क्रेडिट का धंधा भी ज्यादा हो रहा होगा हॉस्पिटल. नाउ हाउ हैज चेंज्ड द share of credit business in the hospitals monthly revenue? So we did a comparison of some hospitals from December of 2019 to December of 2022, month on month comparison, month to month comparison किया था हमने. Same scenario है, सर्दी का मौसम है, similar बीमारियां हो रही होंगी at that point of time, obviously with the outlier of COVID in that case. Now the credit business had jumped almost 2.5 to 3x. तो आप समझ लो कि 18% of the monthly revenue से लेकर in some cases we saw 44 to 60% of the patients that are coming in the hospital today are cashless health insurance patients. Amazing for the patients. This is like the most brilliant thing that can happen in the direction of actually achieving financial inclusivity, and that's like the first thing that should happen as well. Now that creates a problem on the provider. So there are three terms I'll be using, Shreyas, for ease. I'll just tell you क्या रहता है. So hospital is a provider, your insurer is your payer. This is for cashless health insurance, and your patient is your patient. So there are these three pieces: provider, payer, and patient. So healthcare provider जो होता है आपका, उसका जब 44 to 60% of the revenue, monthly revenue, is locked up in future promissory receivables, which might be anywhere between 60 to 75 days. They have a tough time managing their cash flows because industry margins are not that great for hospitals at this point of time. They vary anywhere between 14%, 12 to 14% is on the lower side, and 18 to 22% is on the higher side for a multi-specialty to super specialty kind of a hospital. I'm not counting here the larger chains. These are usually single name standalone hospitals that will be anywhere between 15 bedded से लेके 300-350 bed तक के अस्पताल हो सकते हैं. So since the industry margins are also not that great, they run into a cash flow crunch. अब उससे क्या होता है कि उनके downstream payouts get delayed. What are the downstream payouts for the hospital? अब मैं आपको breakdown अगर बताऊं तो nearly 32% is just salaries. Usually, which would include the salary of the surgeon who's performed the surgery, the salaries of the allied healthcare staff like nurses, attendant ward boys, and the likes of those. And about 48% is just purchase of drugs and consumables, which is technically cost of goods sold COGS. So यहाँ पे सबसे ज़्यादा problem होता है because the average vendor repayment cycle in the country from a hospital to a vendor is more than 4 months at this point of time for this thing.
That's way too high.
It's way high. It's way too high at this point.
More than a quarter.
It's crazy. I mean, it's actually bonkers, frankly. Which is where hospitals also are not able to negotiate good. Basically, there's this concept called CD, cash discount, with these guys as well, which is a result of the fact कि जो vendor है जो बेच रहा है उसको पता है जब उसका 4 महीने में पैसा आ रहा है वो अपना notional capital loss plug in करके ही costing लगाएगा.
Exactly.
Which creates तो उसमें मतलब it directly impacts the bottom line of the hospital at the end of the day, and it brings in the sustainability of the hospital into question. यार अपने को इतने बड़े हॉस्पिटल्स बनाने हैं, वेरी गुड. अपने को इतने सारे पेशेंट्स को इंश्योर करना है और उनको कैशलेस ऑफर करना, अमेजिंग थिंग. बट हु इज गोइंग टू थिंक अबाउट द प्रोवाइडर? Like they are the most integral part of the ecosystem that is actually offering the service at the end of the day.
Right. Yeah, I think this is actually a large scale problem statement that can essentially cascade into something bigger if it was not addressed properly. And I think that is essentially where your financing piece comes into play, right?
Yeah.
So let's dive a bit more deeper into how you guys do it and how it works.
So just talking about the cashless claim side of it at this point of time, अगर मैं आपको बताऊं तो I'll just walk you through the journey of a patient.
Sure.
As a patient holding a cashless health insurance, I walk into the hospital, I get something known as a pre-auth or a pre-auth approval from the insurance company saying that कि अच्छा आपको, say for example मेरे को total knee replacement कराना है, मेरा package cost, this is a package treatment. So there are two kinds of treatments in insurance. One is a package treatment, one is medical management. wherein medical management में डिफाइन नहीं होता. जैसे आपका डेंगू फीवर हो गया फॉर एग्जाम्पल, मेरे को पता नहीं मेरे को कितना दिन अस्पताल में रहना पड़ेगा, समथिंग होता है. बट TKR में मेरे को पता है कि अच्छा ओके हाँ घुटना निकलेगा, नए बोल्ट्स डालेंगे, 2 दिन का रिकवरी टाइम पीरियड है, तो वी कैन बेसिकली सैचेटाइज दिस कॉस्ट एक तरीके से, सो दैट हैगल ना करना पड़े आपको. तो मैंने प्री ऑथ अप्रूवल ले लिया. आई गेट एडमिटेड टू द हॉस्पिटल. my treatment gets done, I do my 2 days of recovery. Total मैं 3 दिन बैठा अस्पताल में, right?
True.
उसके बाद में I get a discharge summary from the hospital as a patient. That discharge summary gets submitted by their TPA department to the insurance company for the approval letter. Right. Discharge summary and invoice जो hospital बनाता है. So invoice say for example 2.6 lakhs का बना है from the hospital, but मेरा cover is just for 2.5. इंश्योरर कहता है मैं 2.5 दे रहा हूँ, 10,000 मैंने मेरे पॉकेट से पे करे and I am allowed to get discharged. That is where the credit days start for the hospital as well, because that say that is day 0. What we do is that we tell the hospital that we'll help you finance this invoice today, so that you don't have to wait for 60 days and run into working capital gap. आप अपने salaries time पे दो, आप अपने vendors के साथ better payment negotiate करो, ताकि you can get an additional cash discount. That cash discount would usually be higher than the cost of financing that we would be offering, by the way. Right. Again, coming from the pharma supply chain, I understand the margins that drugs and consumables also differently work at.
Of course.
In that sense. So, sorry about that. Basically, the idea over there is that we take that final approval letter, we consider that to be a promissory note, because as per IRDAI mandate, an insurance company has to honor that particular payment, which is the final, which is mentioned in the final approval letter, and this would be across the board, private, PSU, even government schemes for that matter.
Okay.
कि सर्विस लिया है तो आपको वो ऑनर करना पड़ेगा अगर आपने अप्रूवल दे दिया है उसके ऊपर तो.
Got it. The pre-auth letter.
नहीं, फाइनल अप्रूवल लेटर.
फाइनल
डिस्चार्ज के समय में मिला है. So we take that approval letter, we consider that to be a promissory note, and basis that the जो settlement amount mentioned होता है, we provide an early financing to the hospital on the basis of a credit line that has been extended to them. So there is a one-time underwriting basis which a credit line gets extended as per their requirement. Say अगर उनका 15 लाख का business हो रहा है महीने का, then and their average receivable cycle is about 75 days. So we'll create a product around that offers them like a reasonable amount of like a reasonable percentage of that actual requirement that allows them to better manage their working capital. Most importantly, where they will utilize it is to better negotiate repayment terms with the vendors and to keep the visiting consultants that are performing the surgeries happy by paying them on time.
Understood. No, makes sense. I think this is actually very much needed, and it is pretty what do you say? So I don't word for it, but it's a pretty the required solution as of now for this entire value chain as such. Only thing that I'm really trying to put a finger on is when you take a step back and look at it, maybe pre-COVID or back in probably 2016, 2017 era. I started my first job in healthcare finance industry with HDFC Bank, right? Basically acquiring hospitals for them and giving them loans for buying equipments or equipment financing हो गया, clinic setup करना है तो पूरा end-to-end financing, everything. So everything for doctors and medical professionals what we used to do. So what I want to understand is how has the industry changed from then to now, and this sudden requirement that came in because of the government mandate, why is it not being fulfilled by banks, and why is the technological intervention currently being needed?
Fair enough. I think it's a very, very fair question to be asked. Now, अब financing भी है ना आपकी दो टाइप की होती है healthcare में. One is patient financing, which we which is basically usually out-of-pocket expenditures के लिए, and there are a lot of good companies, for example, like Health, that are doing that particular thing as well. Then there is this angle of B2B. B2B में अलग अलग segments wherein there is an asset financing and there is a non-asset financing. So asset-backed financing is what banks are amazing at. Like no one can beat them. One of the lowest default portfolio that you see for any bank would be in healthcare based lending as well. But they also like वहाँ पे say they're good for financing equipment. They're good for financing what do you say, setup cost. But everything comes with a collateral. In that case, true. And they create most of the charges get created are given to the primary banker of the hospital. And NBFC or a fintech comes into play over here because it's a relatively I would say it's a new problem at this point of time, which is which has come up in the post-COVID scenario, wherein suddenly the credit business has shot up so much that sustainability of hospitals is becoming a question. Second, we're talking about a receivable financing which is non-asset backed in this scenario. So, which is usually not something that interests the bank in that case right now, because आप usually आप देखोगे कोई बैंक का अगर मैंने 100 रुपए का asset पे charge create किया हुआ है, I am comfortable financing anywhere between 72 to 78. अगर बहुत अच्छा customer है, relationship है, मैं 80 तक चलेगा. उसके beyond usually a bank does not go. This is something that comes out of it. So what we tell them, what this becomes is an OD++, which is non-asset backed with a recourse on the receivable.
Purely unsecured.
This is an unsecured with a recourse on the receivable, obviously. Like there's a charge on the receivable that gets financed.
So it would also be a slightly discounted. तो अगर मेरा 1 लाख का अगर मेरा अप्रूवल लेटर है फॉर एग्जांपल एंड मिड डिस्चार्ज के बाद जो लेटर मिलता है दैट इज फॉर 1 लाख against which you would be probably giving me as a provider you would be giving me 95,000 or something like
something around that like I won't get into the number but like you're very right it works
discounting
exactly like factoring it works exactly like discounting or factoring in that case correct but the product that is extended is a line of credit product they only pay on what they utilize.
So okay got it so it's not like the entire amount is credited into their account you give them a factored line of credit.
Exactly.
Which is then utilized by them as and when needed.
Because there's no point if say for example they only need to utilize like say 75%, why should they pay interest on the remainder of the 25%?
Right.
It just makes it more sort of appealing for them as well कि I can control what I'm paying for.
जितना use कर रहे हैं pay as you go. It's more like a business credit card based secured business credit card जैसा product बन गया है. But the disbursement is, I think, more from a credit line perspective. It's more like a line of credit that's available to you, and whenever you use it, you pay for it.
Absolutely. It's a use. I mean, and there is nothing more important for a doctor or a hospital owner than feeling. It gives them a sense of empowerment. I also have control on what I am paying for in that case.
Right. So let's talk about how the funding part of this works, right? The financing part of this works. On the back end, what kind of entities do you have? Do you work closely with banks, NBFCs? How have you seen them react to this entire situation, and how has the uptake been?
We work with multiple NBFCs at this point of time. We work with banks, but for a certain different category of products on that particular brand. Because once you get into a hospital, they trust like I said, like there are multiple financing solutions that can be provided to a hospital, but we wanted to address the quote unquote morphine problem, which was कि जो आज उनका सबसे बड़ा pain point working capital manage करना है. So let's address that particular thing. Let's build our trust with the partner on the working capital, and then we can think about offering vitamin solutions, which is where we work with multiple banking partners. As in when the request comes in, we know कि किसका policy क्या है and everything of that sort, and that way. So we work in LSP partnership with NBFC at this point of time, lending service provider partnerships. So यहाँ पे how they reacted to the product. Initially, I would say there was friction. It took me a lot of time to convince somebody because, like I said, we were the first ones in the market to actually say कि this is a receivable that we want to finance. It is a cashless health insurance receivable and everything. Firstly, establishing the fact that it is actually a pain point was also a challenge initially. I had to make multiple partners speak with hospitals that I knew of, जिनसे हमारी बात हो रही थी. Not just hospitals, but like also HSPs, healthcare service providers, जो जैसे like companies that offer dialysis services, companies that offer oncology-oriented services, like how they are hurting because their receivables are stuck with insurance ने पैसा नहीं दिया है अभी तक, and so on and so forth.
True.
It took some time to explain that particular thing, but once they started seeing the result, and it took time for the results to also come in. Shreyas, I'll be very honest about that. It's not like कि हमने आज partnership sign किया and then I had a pipeline that was like just ready to be harvested at that point. Wasn't the case. It took us a while. Then because once you convince the banking partner, then you have to convince the hospital on the policy.
True.
So it's like a balanced thing that we have to do on both the approaches. And now there are two regulatory bodies here. that we are playing with. We are not just toying, like we are not just playing by RBI rules, we are also playing by IRDAI rules over here in that case, because so dono ke dono hai. So that way it took us some time, which is where the whole lag of research and like doing that very in-depth research and getting those partnerships onboarded. Now it is, what do you say, it's slowly transitioning from a push to a pull in that sense. So people want to know what we are doing, people want to see how we are doing it as well, and so on and so forth. But it's like the oldest trick in the book. Like you start with somebody who will eventually develop faith in you. Then it just like I'll use my favorite word here again, critical mass. Once you achieve a certain critical mass, then it becomes easier. And that's
true. I think that makes a lot of sense, and I think thank you so much for that. This has really been insightful. Basically, knowing that these are the intricacies that kind of play out in the healthcare industry as of now, and the product that you have developed, it's actually pretty interesting, given the fact that it is essentially, since I come from the payments industry, I kind of equated it to a credit card, but in the form factor of a credit line or an OD, right? Ki revolving credit hai, jab bhi aapko chahiye, you can take and you pay interest only on that, right? So that essentially the part wherein you pay interest only for the amount you consume, it becomes a blessing for the person who's actually utilizing it. So kudos on that. I think that's a great product. Having said that, this brings us to the last and final question for the day, which is essentially, since you have seen and you kind of made a really great demarcation of timelines in terms of how the healthcare ecosystem has evolved in the last decade. I don't know, for some reason, whenever I say decade, I flash back to 2007, and now it's almost 20 years old.
Yeah, I know, right? I know. I was watching Friends the other day, and I realized, damn, it's still around. Absolutely.
So yeah, I have to remind myself, the decade is 2014-15. Exactly. Yeah. So yeah, in the last decade, like when you made that clear demarcation ki nahi ye jo apna 2019 pre-COVID post-COVID jo ho gaya hai apna ADBC wala piece, essentially how do you see the new healthcare ecosystem that emerged from post-COVID era? How do you see that evolving, and how do you see the role of finance playing in that? Because earlier when I worked in the healthcare industry, that was in the pre-COVID era. Very rigid set state of rules and all of that, where you kind of have to ki apna equipment financing hai, equipment ke samne, invoice ke samne you give the loan, equipment is essentially a security that you have, and all of those things, right? Ya fir agar clinic ke liye finance kar rahe ho, to you have the clinic as a security. Yeah. Very standard this thing. Unsecured loans were given as a personal loan to the doctor or the owner of the hospital as such, but nothing outside that. And now you see this entire new suite of products coming along, which should probably revolutionize the working capital piece for the hospitals. So how do you see this evolving in the next half a decade?
Correct. Thanks. I'll just segregate the question into two parts.
Sure.
One is the healthcare side of it, and one is the financing side of it. Starting off with the healthcare side of it, I'm not personally a big fan of Narayana Health business model and everything as well. And because I've always felt that they're the fastest to adopt any kind of new tech. Like they're the only, like they have their own HR system. They were so forward thinking that they built it in-house and then continue to implement it across all the NH hospitals. I feel the same thing that is happening with Narayana Health Insurance now, which is the newest product that has come into the they came up with this Aditi product recently. It was their first health insurance plan that they've launched. This is a model that has worked in the states, provider-led insurance, and it's worked well. I feel that they might help hospitals become more cash flow stable, but still like India continues to need much more smaller hospitals in much more like in pockets like tier 2 and tier 3, which is where entities hospital structures like Pujala Cygnus in the northern part of their country come into the picture. They have multiple small 30 to 40 bedded hospitals at this point of time in tier 2 and tier 3 cities, wherein the penetration of healthcare is low, but the presence, like presence of government health insurances are there, because that is something that is getting very deeply penetrated in tier 2 and tier 3 cities at this point of time, and will continue to do so. So that is where financing will continue to play a very, very strong role. Moment we talk about tier 2 and tier 3, we start thinking impact. Impact in health can be driven by impact oriented finance again, wherein there is a expected a rate of, wherein the expectation, the rate of return is also slightly concessional. The good thing is again that India is being looked at by multiple such impacts, which where there is a lot of capital that can be routed in order to create both accessibility and affordability, which are the two key tenets of healthcare impact, or which will drive SDG target 3.8 as well. Right. So the way that I see it, or the way that I see it growing, would be to have that sort of a forward-thinking approach when you talk about impact. But when you talk about impact, sustainability should not be left out of question. It should always be a sustainable impact kind of a solution that gets offered. So what, for example, it slips my mind. There's this company in EdTech that did something very similar for educational financing, associated with Dasha Impact, if I'm not wrong. So that's the direction that I see this growing at scale personally. The next 10 years, if we have to achieve the goal of universal health coverage by 2030, we have to do it in 6 years, then we have to think impact oriented.
Definitely. I think I completely agree with you on this, and I think these are exciting times for the healthcare industry. And given the amount of change that we have seen, coming out of the post-COVID era developments, once the kind of COVID slightly receded, and given the mandates that government has given, I think everyone is going to be a bit more bullish on creating unique solutions for this segment as well.
Yeah.
And super excited for this segment as well. And as I said, this completely took me by surprise. I don't know, maybe I was not as well read as I should have been, given that I am doing the podcast in this industry as well. But yeah, it took me by surprise when I saw a lot of people suddenly starting to build in this industry, and I was like, yaar, ho kya raha hai, dekhna padega.
There's a lot of things to be built, frankly speaking. A lot of things to be built cohesively, because of this domain में आप हेल्थ में जहाँ पत्थर फेंको वहाँ पैसे का नीड है. सिंपल एज दैट. मतलब equipment, equipment very well. For example, so if the beds are growing, obviously equipment financing will grow simultaneously. Because tertiary care mein you cannot operate without some kind of equipment. As the hospitals grow, diagnostic services will grow as well, which is also again going to be a driving factor for that particular thing, for capex oriented investment. So I mean, it's a very interesting space to be in at this point of time in India, particularly.
Indeed. No, I think this was really insightful, Shrey. Thank you so much for your time today, and it was a pleasure having you here. Got to learn a lot, and you have had a super exciting journey so far. And wishing you all the luck for the future.
It was great being here, and thanks a lot for having me here as well.
Thank you.
Take care.
You too. Bye bye.